I almost didn't notice it. That's the part that stays with me even now. My son had just passed the breadbasket to his girlfriend, and she was laughing at something my brother-in-law said. And the table was full and warm and loud, the way it gets at Thanksgiving when everyone's had enough wine to stop being careful with each other. And somewhere in the middle of all that, my son set down his fork, picked it back up, set it down again. 3 times. I was reaching for the gravy when I saw it. My hand stopped. He wasn't looking at me. He was smiling at something across the table, nodding, completely present in the conversation. But his hand, just his hand, had done the thing we made up 14 years ago when he was 9 years old, and I was driving him to a birthday party he didn't want to go to, and he asked me, out of nowhere, "Dad, what if I want to leave somewhere but I can't say it out loud?" 3 taps on the nearest surface. That was our answer. It meant, I need you. Something's wrong. Don't react yet. Just know. We'd used it twice in his whole life before that night. Once when he was 12 and a coach said something to him that made him uncomfortable. And once when he was 16 and a situation at a party got strange. Both times I'd gotten him out without a scene, without embarrassment, and afterward we talked. I hadn't thought about it in years. I looked at him across the Thanksgiving table. He smiled at me, completely casual, like nothing had happened, like his hand hadn't just sent me a message that went back 14 years. I picked up the gravy and said nothing. His name is Evan. He's 23 now, works in logistics, lives 40 minutes from us in a place he shares with 2 roommates. He'd been dating this woman, I'll call her Petra, for about 7 months when he brought her to Thanksgiving. She was put together in a way that read as intentional. The kind of woman who arrives at someone else's family dinner with a candle and a specific wine and says all the right things about the house. She called my wife by her first name within the first 10 minutes, which I noticed. She asked about the photos on the hallway wall, got the stories behind each one, remembered the names when she referenced them again at dinner. My brother-in-law thought she was fantastic. My wife was cautiously warm. My mother, who is 71 and has very few remaining filters, said later that night after everyone left, "She's performing." I hadn't said anything to my mother. She'd gotten there herself. But at the table, before the fork, I was still in the cautiously warm column. Petra was funny. She was attentive to Evan. She helped clear the first round of plates without being asked. There was nothing I could have pointed to. It was just a feeling. The kind you don't say out loud because you don't want to be the difficult father. Then, the fork. The conversation had shifted, the way dinner conversations do, from the easy stuff into something with more weight. My brother-in-law was talking about his retirement account, something about rebalancing, and whether he'd made the right moves this year. It was the kind of talk that happens at family dinners when the men at the table are past 50 and the wine is open and nobody's really thinking about who's listening. Petra asked a few questions. Smart ones. She asked about his brokerage, whether he used a financial advisor or managed it himself, what his timeline looked like for retiring. My brother-in-law answered all of it without hesitation because she was charming and it seemed like genuine curiosity. Then she turned to me. "Evan says you've been at the same company for a long time," she said. "That kind of stability must have made planning a lot easier." I said something vague and agreeable. I'm not naturally suspicious of people, but something about the pivot, from my brother-in-law's specifics to a question about me, framed through what Evan had told her, landed differently than I would have expected. I looked at Evan. He was looking at his plate. That was when he set his fork down. Once. Twice, 3 times, I didn't react. That was always the rule. Don't react. The signal meant I see it, I'm with you. We'll talk later. It didn't mean make a scene or change the subject sharply or give the other person any signal that a signal had been given. I finished dinner. I laughed at the right moments. I helped with the dishes. When Petra offered to help wrap up the leftovers, I let her. And I watched her move around my kitchen with a familiarity that felt slightly too comfortable for a 7th-month girlfriend at her first family holiday. They left around 9. Evan hugged me at the door and said quietly, next to my ear, "I'll call you tomorrow." I nodded. My wife asked me later if something was wrong. I said I was just tired. She let it go, but she watched me for a long moment before she did, the way she does when she suspects I'm managing something. I didn't sleep much that night. He called me at 8 in the morning. He was in his car, parked outside his apartment, and I could tell from his voice that he'd been awake for a while too. He told me about a conversation he'd had with Petra 3 weeks earlier. She'd been going through some financial stress, she said, and she'd asked Evan, casually, he thought at the time, whether his family had much in savings. He told her we'd done okay. She'd asked follow-up questions over the next few weeks, again casually, about whether I had an advisor, whether I was the kind of person who liked to be in control of my own money or preferred to let someone else handle it. Evan had answered because they were questions about his father, and they didn't seem loaded. Then a week before Thanksgiving, she'd told him about a friend of hers who was doing very well with a private investment opportunity. High returns, limited spots, only available through referrals. She'd already gotten in, she said, and she thought it might be something his father would appreciate knowing about. Evan went quiet for a second on the phone. Then he said, "Dad, I looked it up. The company Petra's friend ran had a website that was 4 months old. The address listed was a UPS store in a suburb of Phoenix. The testimonials used stock photos. When Evan searched the name of the man running it, he found one forum post from 18 months ago where someone described the same pitch, the same structure, the same urgency, and the same outcome. They'd wired $40,000 and never saw it again." Evan hadn't said anything to Petra yet. He didn't know how to or whether to. He'd been sitting with it for 6 days. He came to Thanksgiving anyway because he didn't know what else to do. And when the conversation at the dinner table turned to finances, when Petra started asking the questions he recognized from his own kitchen 3 weeks ago, he did the only thing he could think of. He tapped his fork 3 times. I sat in my kitchen after I got off the phone with him, and I thought about the version of that night where I missed it, where his hand moved and I was looking somewhere else, or where I'd forgotten, after 14 years, what 3 taps meant, where the conversation at Thanksgiving had gone a step further and I'd ended up in a follow-up call with Petra's friend, or whatever name the person on the other end of that phone actually used. I've spent 22 years in supply chain management. I understand how fraud works in business. Falsified invoices, vendor kickbacks, identity schemes, but I have never once thought about it at my own dinner table. I trusted the perimeter of my family in a way I'd never thought to examine. Evan had examined it for me. He'd done the research, found the evidence, and then used a signal from his childhood to tell me without tipping her off, without a confrontation at the table, without ruining the holiday for everyone in the room. He's 23 years old and he protected me. I had to sit with that for a while. The following week, I did my own research on top of his. Evan sent me the links, the forum post, the screenshot of the company's registration date. I spent 2 evenings going further. I found 2 other names connected to the same scheme, different websites, same structure. One of them had a complaint filed with the FTC. The operation appeared to move around, change names, recruit new people to play the front-facing role, while the actual money disappeared into a different layer. Petra wasn't the architect of it. That much seemed clear. She may have genuinely lost money herself at some point, or she may have been brought in as a referrer who got a small cut for every person she successfully brought to the table. Either way, she was a working part of something designed to take money from people who trusted her. I called a friend of mine who spent 15 years as a fraud investigator for an insurance company before he retired. I walked him through what we had. He confirmed what I suspected. The structure was consistent with affinity fraud, schemes that work by infiltrating networks of trust, usually family connections, church groups, professional circles. The goal is always to get to someone with money through someone they love. They didn't target you, he told me. They targeted your son. You were the destination. I thought about that for a long time. I want to be honest about what came next, because I think it's the part people don't always tell. Evan had to break up with her, not because I asked him to, but because once he understood what had been happening, he couldn't unknow it. The woman he'd spent 7 months with had spent at least 6 of those weeks actively moving him toward a moment where his father would lose money. whether or not she felt something genuine for him. And maybe she did, I don't know, I can't know that. She had used him. He called me the night after they talked. He was quiet in a way that's different from his regular quiet. He said it went the way he expected. She denied knowing the company was fraudulent. She said her friend was legitimate, that Evan was overreacting, that he'd just blown up a relationship over a forum post by some stranger. She cried. She said he was making her feel like a criminal for trying to share something she thought would help his family. He held the line. When he told me that, I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said I was proud of him. He said, "I know, Dad." The way he said it, not dismissive, just certain, like he'd always known it. I had to look out the window for a second. We reported what we found to the FTC and the State Attorney General's office. I won't pretend I know what came of it. Those things move slowly, and the people running these operations are used to moving faster. But we documented everything, the forum post, the registration records, the website screenshots, all of it, and we submitted it. Whether it helps someone else avoid the same thing, I don't know. I hope it did. My brother-in-law didn't know any of this until 2 months later when I told him over lunch. He went pale. He'd answer her questions without a thought because she was sitting at my table, in my house at a family holiday, and that context made her feel safe. He said, "I told her which brokerage I use. I told him to watch his accounts. He did. Nothing happened to him. He hadn't been the target, he'd just been the warm-up, but he changed his passwords that afternoon anyway." My wife took it differently than I expected. She wasn't angry the way I thought she might be. She was quiet, and then she said, "I knew something was off, I couldn't say what." I told her my mother had said the same thing. My wife laughed, a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Your mother has good instincts?" "She does. I should have paid more attention. The thing I keep coming back to isn't the fraud itself. Fraud happens. People build systems designed to exploit the fact that we extend trust to the people who come with someone we love, and that trust is actually a beautiful thing, even when it gets used against us. I'm not interested in becoming someone who treats every new person in my son's life like a suspect. What I keep coming back to is the fork. Evan was 23 years old, and he was sitting at a Thanksgiving table with a woman he'd been seeing for 7 months, a woman he brought home to meet his family for the first time, a woman who may have had real feelings for him that were tangled up in something ugly, and instead of saying nothing, instead of waiting to see how it played out, he reached back to something we made up when he was 9 years old in a car on the way to a birthday party. He trusted me, not just to notice it, but to handle it the right way. To not make a scene, to not put him in the middle. To protect him the same way I always had, without making it cost him anything in the room. That kind of trust doesn't come from one conversation. It comes from 14 years of being the person who shows up quietly and doesn't make it harder than it has to be. I don't say that to sound like a good father. I say it because I spent a lot of years wondering if I was showing up in the ways that actually mattered, or just in the ways that were easy to see. Coaching his little league team. Showing up to graduations. The visible stuff. The signal was always there. I just didn't know if he still believed in it. He did. A few weeks after everything had settled, Evan came over for dinner. Just the two of us. My wife was visiting her sister. We ordered pizza and watched part of a game and mostly talked about other things. At the end of the night, when he was putting his coat on at the door, I asked him when he decided to use the signal. He thought about it. He said it was the moment Petra asked me the question about the company I work for. He said he saw something change in her posture, a kind of attention that wasn't the same as polite dinner conversation, and he thought, this is actually happening right now. I almost didn't do it, he said. It felt weird to use something from when I was a kid. I told him it was never about age. It was about telling me something when you couldn't say it out loud. He nodded. He had his hand on the door. Then he said, "I think maybe we should make a new one, in case we ever need it for something else." I told him we had time to figure that out. He left. I stood in the front hallway for a while after the door closed, with the porch light still on, and I thought about all the things I was glad we'd kept without knowing we were keeping them. The signal, the habit of research, the ability to stay in a room and not react until the right moment, the understanding between a father and a son that doesn't need to be stated because it's been practiced for so long, it lives in the body. None of it felt dramatic at the time. It rarely does. The stuff that actually holds. I turned off the porch light and went back inside. I've thought a lot about why this ended the way it did, and I keep arriving at the same answer. It ended well because of things that were built quietly, over years, without anyone calling them important. Petra didn't fail because she was caught by some sophisticated trap. She failed because my son paid attention. He noticed the shift in her posture at the dinner table. He remembered conversations from 3 weeks before and understood in real time what they had been building toward. He did the research on his own without being asked before he said a word to me. That's not luck. That's a person who has trained himself to look at the world honestly, even when honesty is uncomfortable. Evan could have told himself a different story, that her questions were just curiosity, that the investment opportunity was probably fine, that he was being paranoid. A lot of people choose that story because it's easier. He didn't. There's a version of cause and effect that people talk about only when things go wrong, when someone loses money, when someone gets hurt, when the thing they ignored finally becomes impossible to ignore. But it works the other way too. Every time I answered Evan's questions honestly when he was growing up, even the inconvenient ones, I was building something. Every time I followed through on a small promise, I was building something. Every time I got him out of a situation without making it a bigger deal than it needed to be, I was building something. I didn't think of it as building anything at the time. I just thought of it as showing up. But Evan absorbed it, the same way kids absorb everything, not from what you say, but from what you consistently do. The signal itself is almost beside the point. What mattered was that he believed, at 23 years old, that if he told me something was wrong, I would handle it in a way that didn't make things harder for him. That belief came from 14 years of evidence. You can't manufacture that kind of trust on short notice. It either exists or it doesn't, and whether it exists depends entirely on what you've been doing when nothing seemed to be at stake. I think about the courage it took for him to use that signal. He'd been sitting with this knowledge for 6 days. He came to Thanksgiving anyway, sat across from a woman he'd cared about, watched her ask questions he now recognized as part of a script, and instead of either saying nothing or blowing up the table, he chose the third option. The quiet option. The one that required him to trust me completely and control himself completely at the same time. That's not something you learn from a single conversation. That's character, built slowly, tested in small moments first, and then available when the moment is large. Petra made a choice too. Somewhere along the way, she decided that using someone's trust was an acceptable cost for whatever she stood to gain. Maybe she told herself it wasn't really harmful, or that people like me could afford to lose a little money, or that the line between a referral and a con was blurry enough to stand on. Those small justifications have a way of compounding. Each one makes the next one easier. That's its own kind of cause and effect, not dramatic, not sudden, just a slow drift away from the person you could have been. I don't have any anger left about it. What I have instead is something harder to name. A kind of gratitude that sits right next to grief, because I know how close I came to missing what my son was telling me. One distracted moment, and I look up to find his fork already still and his eyes already somewhere else, and the conversation already passed. He tapped 3 times. I looked up. That's the whole story, really. Everything else was just what happened because of those 2 things.